Hello and welcome. This mini webinar is going to cover specifically how to qualify for our secondary application at Washington State University, also known as Floyd College of Medicine. My name is Dr. Layla Harrison. I'm the Senior Assistant Dean for Admissions and Student Affairs. So we have pretty straightforward requirements to receive our secondary application. These are non-negotiable. They're clearly spelled out on the website as well, but they include 4 components. I highly encourage you to review these to ensure that you do or will meet these secondary requirements before submitting and paying the AMCAS fee to apply to our medical school, because these are non-negotiable. We do not make any exceptions to these. The first one is that you must be a US citizen or a US permanent resident. The second one is that you have to meet ties to our state, to the state of Washington. So you have to meet 3 or 4 from Washington ties, which I'll detail in a second, or you have to be able to meet a definition of resident student by Washington state law. So regardless of what your current state of residence is, if you meet 3 of the 4 following ties to Washington, then you qualify for our connections to Washington requirements. So you have to either have been born in Washington, graduated from a Washington high school, you have a childhood address in Washington, and that is detailed in AMCAS, and then you have a parent or a guardian who currently lives in Washington, again, detailed in AMCAS. All of these pieces of information we look for in AMCAS. So if you meet 3 or 4 of those, regardless of what your state of residence is, then you qualify for our connections to Washington. If you do not meet 3 or 4 of these ties, then you will have to submit a residency questionnaire with documentation to be able to prove that you meet a definition of a resident student. So therefore, you must have residency in or have other qualifications that are outlined per state law to meet our resident student of Washington requirements. The third one is that you have to meet one of the 3 MCAT and GPA combination thresholds. There is another mini webinar that covers this specifically. So again, I would highly encourage you to review that to determine whether or not at some point in the admissions process you're applying in, that you would meet these requirements. And then finally, you have to have all letters of recommendation submitted to AMCAS and that we then receive from AMCAS. Our requirement is that you have either 3 individual letters, or if you have a health professions advisory committee packet, that will suffice as meeting the requirements by itself. In our process, our AMCAS deadline is October 15th. Our secondary deadline is December 1. Once you meet those secondary requirements at any point, once we begin receiving applications, which this year it's in July, then if you meet those 4 requirements I just outlined, our process automatically sends you a secondary application, our system does. And then when you submit that secondary back, it completes your application. And from that point forward, our system blinds MCAT and GPA all the way through our process. So in our process, no human ever reviews your MCAT and GPA because we've established these combination thresholds based off of national data that tells us that you'll be successful in medical school based off of a very large data set actually. And so we don't feel like we need to look at MCAT and GPA again. So we blind it. And so when your application is going through the screening process to be recommended for interview, during the interview process, and then through the admissions process, there is no human being that is ever seeing your MCAT and GPA. So that kind of details this part of the process, but it's part of what are the requirements to receive our secondary application. This is a timeline for the entering year 2021. Cover some of those deadlines I just outlined. We are being very thoughtful this year about applicants maybe needing to take an MCAT later in the season. So we're certainly not going to offer all of our interview spots until every applicant that has met our secondary requirements and has submitted it back to us has an opportunity to be considered for an interview. We actually are thoughtful of that every year. We don't fill all of our interview spots until every candidate that has submitted a secondary can be assessed for an interview. But this timeline is also on our website, so I highly encourage you to review it if you have questions. And finally, if you have any questions about our secondary requirements, please don't hesitate to reach out to my office. The main email inbox is here. We check it every day. We're happy to get back to you and answer your questions. Thank you.